In the comfortable living room of his modest ranch house on Elm Street in Cedar Falls, Iowa, William Bill Thompson, 73, carefully adjusts the family photographs on the mantelpiece above the brick fireplace. The afternoon sun filters through lace curtains that his late wife Eleanor chose 20 years ago, casting gentle shadows across walls lined with memories of a life well lived. The scent of fresh coffee mingles with the lingering aroma of the apple pie cooling on the kitchen counter. Bill's attempt at recreating Eleanor's famous recipe for his granddaughter's upcoming birthday. Bill runs his weathered fingers over a silver-framed photo taken last Christmas. The entire Thompson family gathered around the tree in this very room. His daughter Susan, 45, radiant in her red sweater, stands beside her husband Mark, 48, while their two children, Emma, 16, and Jason, 12, sit cross-legged on the carpet, surrounded by wrapping paper and holiday joy. Bill himself sits in his favorite recliner, the brown leather worn smooth by decades of use, his face glowing with the contentment of a grandfather surrounded by love. The photo represents everything Bill treasures most: family traditions, holiday gatherings, the sound of children's laughter filling rooms that had grown too quiet since Eleanor's passing 3 years ago. Until Eleanor's death, Bill had been the family's anchor, the patriarch who hosted every holiday, birthday, and celebration. His house had been the gathering place where Susan brought her children every weekend, where Mark would help Bill with yard work, while the women prepared elaborate Sunday dinners. Bill's recovery from knee replacement surgery 2 months ago had been slower than expected. At 73, his body didn't bounce back the way it used to, and the physical therapy sessions left him more tired than he cared to admit. But he was getting stronger every day, walking without the walker now, managing the stairs to his bedroom without assistance. The surgeon had pronounced his recovery excellent for a man his age, and Bill was eager to return to the active lifestyle he'd maintained since retirement. The sound of car doors slamming in the driveway interrupts his thoughts. Through the front window, Bill watches Susan's black SUV pull into his driveway, followed by Mark's silver sedan. His heart lifts with anticipation. They're probably here to discuss the family's annual summer vacation, a tradition that has continued unbroken for 15 years. Every July, the Thompson family would rent a beach house in Outer Banks, North Carolina, spending 2 weeks building sandcastles, fishing from the pier, and creating memories that would last a lifetime. Bill smooths his button-down shirt and checks his appearance in the hallway mirror. Despite his age, he takes pride in his appearance. His silver hair neatly combed, his blue eyes still bright and alert, his posture straight despite the recent surgery. Eleanor always said he was the most handsome man she'd ever known. And even in widowhood, Bill maintains the standards she set for him. Susan enters first, her designer handbag slung over her shoulder and her expression businesslike rather than familial. She's dressed in expensive workout clothes that probably cost more than Bill spends on groceries in a month. Her blonde hair pulled back in a perfect ponytail that speaks of regular salon appointments and a lifestyle far removed from Bill's modest retirement income. Mark follows behind her, checking his smartphone and barely acknowledging Bill's warm greeting. "Hi, Dad," Susan says, settling onto the floral sofa without removing her sunglasses. "We need to talk." The formality in her voice catches Bill off guard. Usually Susan would kiss his cheek, comment on the pie cooling in the kitchen, ask about his physical therapy progress. Today she sits like a stranger in a business meeting, her body language closed and professional. "Of course, sweetheart," Bill says, lowering himself carefully into his recliner. "I was hoping we could discuss the beach house rental. I know it's getting late to book, but I found some great options online. There's a place right on the water with a wheelchair ramp in case my knee isn't completely healed by July." Susan and Mark exchange a look, quick, but not quick enough to escape Bill's notice. It's the kind of look Eleanor used to give him when she was about to deliver unwelcome news. The silent communication of a couple who has already discussed something thoroughly and reached a decision. "That's actually what we wanted to talk about," Mark says, finally looking up from his phone. "The vacation situation." Bill's chest tightens slightly. Something in Mark's tone suggests this conversation isn't going to go the way he hoped. "What about it?" Susan removes her sunglasses and sets them on the coffee table with deliberate precision. Her green eyes, so much like Eleanor's, avoid Bill's gaze as she speaks. "Dad, we've decided to try something different this year. A European vacation, 2 weeks in Italy and France." "Europe?" Bill's face lights up. How exciting. I've always wanted to see the Italian countryside. Eleanor and I talked about going to Tuscany for our 40th anniversary before she got sick. When do we leave? The silence that follows is deafening. Susan stares at her hands, while Mark shifts uncomfortably in his chair. Outside, a neighbor's lawnmower starts up, the sound seeming unnaturally loud in the tense atmosphere of Bill's living room. "Dad," Susan says finally, her voice carefully controlled. "This is a trip for our immediate family. Mark, me, and the kids." The words hit Bill like a physical blow. In 15 years of family vacations, he has never been excluded. Even when Eleanor was too sick to travel during her final year, the family had chosen destinations closer to home so Bill wouldn't feel isolated. The beach house rentals always included space for him. The activities were chosen with his interest in mind, and the traditions they'd built together were sacred. "I don't understand," Bill says quietly. "We always vacation together. It's our tradition." "Times change, Dad," Susan replies, still not meeting his eyes. "The kids are older now. They want to experience different things. And honestly, traveling with someone your age, it's complicated." Someone your age. The phrase hangs in the air like an accusation. Bill is 73, not 93. He's in good health aside from the recent surgery, his mind is sharp, and until 2 months ago he was keeping up with his teenage grandchildren on hiking trails and fishing excursions. "What do you mean, complicated?" Bill asks, though he suspects he doesn't want to hear the answer. Mark leans forward, his expression taking on the patient tone one might use with a child. "Bill, let's be realistic. Your mobility isn't what it used to be. You need help with stairs, you get tired easily, you require special accommodations. It's not fair to limit the whole family's experience because of one person's limitations." One person's limitations. Bill thinks about the man who taught Mark how to fish, who helped him rebuild his car's engine, who walked Susan down the aisle at her wedding 20 years ago. Now he's reduced to one person's limitations. "I'm recovering from surgery," Bill says, his voice stronger now. "The doctor says I'll be back to full mobility within another month, and I've never asked the family to limit anything for my sake. Haven't you?" Susan's voice rises slightly. "Last year at the beach we couldn't go parasailing because you were afraid of heights. The year before we had to find restaurants with senior discounts because you worried about money. Every trip it's something." Bill remembers the parasailing incident differently. He'd encouraged the family to go while he stayed on the beach with Eleanor's book, enjoying the sun and watching his grandchildren play in the surf. As for the restaurants, he'd simply suggested places that offered good value, a lifetime habit of frugality that had allowed him to save enough money to help Susan and Mark with their house down payment 10 years ago. "Susan, I've never prevented anyone from doing anything they wanted to do. It's not about prevention, Dad. It's about atmosphere, energy. Young people want to experience things differently than older people do." The careful way she avoids saying old people makes it worse somehow. Bill realizes that in his daughter's mind, he has crossed some invisible line from father to elderly burden. When did that happen? When did the man who raised her, supported her through college, and helped her build her adult life become someone to be managed rather than included? "Where are Emma and Jason?" Bill asks, noticing for the first time that his grandchildren aren't with their parents. "Do they know about this decision?" Another exchanged look between Susan and Mark. "The kids are excited about Europe," Mark says quickly. "It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for them to experience art, culture, history. And they didn't want their grandfather to share that experience with them?" Susan's composure cracks slightly. "Dad, you're putting us in an impossible position. The kids love you, but they also want to have fun. They want to stay out late, eat at trendy restaurants, go to nightclubs in Paris. They don't want to worry about whether Grandpa is keeping up or needs to rest." Bill feels something cold settle in his chest. His granddaughter Emma, who used to spend every summer weekend at his house, who called him her best friend and brought him her school problems to solve. His grandson Jason, who still insisted on fishing trips where they would talk about everything and nothing while waiting for the fish to bite. These children want to go to nightclubs in Paris rather than include their grandfather in their family vacation. "I see," Bill says quietly. And what am I supposed to do for 2 weeks while my family is in Europe having the time of their lives? Susan's mask slips completely, and for a moment Bill sees something ugly in his daughter's expression. Impatience, resentment, the look of someone who considers this conversation an unwelcome obligation. "You'll do what every other retired person does, Dad," she says, her voice sharp with frustration. "You'll stay home, watch your shows, read your books, tend your garden. That's what retirement is for." "Susan," Mark starts, clearly uncomfortable with his wife's tone. "No, Mark. I'm tired of tiptoeing around this," Susan snaps, turning back to her father with years of suppressed irritation finally surfacing. "Dad, you've had your life. You traveled when you were young, you built a career, you raised a family. Now it's our turn. It's the kids' turn. We can't spend the rest of our lives planning everything around your limitations and your needs." The words strike Bill like physical blows. "You've had your life." As if at 73 he's supposed to quietly fade into the background, grateful for whatever scraps of attention his family throws his way. "I never asked you to plan everything around me," Bill says, his voice steady despite the hurt coursing through him. "I've always tried to be as independent as possible. I cook my own meals, maintain my own house, drive my own car. I thought I was being helpful by participating in family activities, not burdensome." "Helpful?" Susan laughs, but there's no humor in it. "Dad, do you know how exhausting it is to constantly worry about whether you're having a good time? Whether the walking is too much, whether the food is too spicy, whether the accommodations are suitable. We can't just be a family anymore, and we have to be your caretakers." Caretakers. The word cuts deeper than anything else Susan has said. Bill thinks about all the times he's insisted on carrying his own luggage. All the occasions when he's quietly removed himself from activities he thought might be too strenuous. All the efforts he's made to remain independent and undemanding. In his daughter's mind, none of that matters. He's still a burden. "I had no idea I was such an imposition," Bill says, and the quiet dignity in his voice seems to shame Susan into a moment of silence. Mark clears his throat uncomfortably. "Bill, that's not what Susan means. We love you. We want you to be part of the family. But maybe it's time to adjust expectations. Maybe family time can look different now." "Different how?" "Well, instead of going on vacation together, maybe we could visit you when we get back. Show you pictures, tell you about our experiences. You could be involved that way. Involved by looking at photographs of experiences he wasn't allowed to share." Bill thinks about all the family photos on his mantelpiece, realizes that according to this new arrangement, he'll never appear in another one. He'll become the audience for his family's life, rather than a participant in it. "And this is what Emma and Jason want?" Bill asks again. Susan's jaw tightens. The kids understand that family dynamics change as people get older. They're mature enough to accept that Grandpa might not be able to keep up with everything they want to do. But Bill notices that Susan still hasn't answered his question directly. He wonders if his grandchildren even know about this conversation, or if their parents have made this decision unilaterally and will present it to them as a fait accompli. "Well," Bill says, standing slowly and walking to the window, "I suppose that settles it then." He looks out at his front yard, at the flower garden Eleanor planted and he's maintained since her death. The roses are blooming beautifully this year, and he'd planned to cut some for the beach house just as Eleanor always did. Now those roses will bloom and fade while he watches them alone. "Dad, please don't be like this," Susan says, but her tone suggests she's more annoyed by his reaction than sorry for causing it. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." Bill turns back to face his daughter and son-in-law. These people who were once the center of his universe and are now treating him like an outdated piece of furniture they're trying to politely dispose of. "I'm not making anything hard, Susan. I'm just trying to understand when I became the enemy in my own family." "You're not the enemy, Dad. You're just getting older. And older people have different needs, different limitations. It's not personal. Not personal." Bill thinks about the tens of thousands of dollars he's spent on family vacations over the years, about the countless hours he's dedicated to his grandchildren's activities, about the way he's reorganized his entire life around being available for his family's needs. Apparently none of that was personal either. "I think you should leave now," Bill says quietly. Susan's eyes widen. Dad, I need some time to process this conversation, to adjust my expectations as Mark suggested. Mark stands awkwardly, clearly wanting to escape the tension that has filled the room like a toxic gas. Bill, we hope you understand. This isn't about not loving you. Of course, Bill replies. I understand perfectly. The fate of old people is to stay at home watching TV while their families live their lives without them. I've received the message loud and clear. After they leave, Bill sits alone in his living room as the shadows lengthen and the grandfather clock in the hallway marks the passing hours with mechanical precision. The apple pie sits untouched in the kitchen, cooling into irrelevance. The family photographs on the mantelpiece seem to mock him now. Images of a time when he believed his love and presence were valued rather than tolerated. That evening, Bill picks up the phone and calls his financial advisor, Robert Chen, a thoughtful man in his 50s who has managed Bill's retirement portfolio for the past decade. Bob, I need to discuss some changes to my financial arrangements, Bill says, settling into his recliner with a legal pad and pen. Of course, Bill, what kind of changes are you considering? I want to understand my options for redirecting my estate planning. Specifically, I want to know about setting up a charitable trust and changing the beneficiaries on my life insurance policies. There's a pause on the other end of the line. Bill, these are significant decisions. Is everything all right with Susan and the family? Bill considers the question carefully. Is everything all right? His daughter has just informed him that his presence is unwelcome in family activities, that his age and limitations make him a burden rather than a blessing. His grandchildren, according to their parents, prefer European nightclubs to their grandfather's company. His role in the family has been reduced from patriarch to pitied obligation. Everything is exactly as it should be, Robert. I'm just making sure my financial legacy reflects my family's actual needs and priorities. Over the next week, Bill throws himself into research with the methodical thoroughness that served him well during his 40-year career as a civil engineer. He reads about charitable organizations that support elderly people who have been abandoned by their families. He investigates programs that provide companionship and activities for seniors whose children consider them too burdensome to include in family life. What he discovers breaks his heart and opens his eyes. Bill's situation is far from unique. Across America, millions of elderly people are experiencing what gerontologists call social death, the gradual exclusion from family activities and decisions that effectively removes them from their loved ones' lives years or even decades before physical death occurs. The statistics are staggering. 40% of seniors report feeling isolated from their families. 1 in 4 elderly Americans has been excluded from family gatherings they previously attended. The fastest growing demographic in assisted living facilities isn't people who need medical care, but people whose families have decided they're too inconvenient to accommodate in regular family life. Bill reads testimonials from other seniors who describe experiences eerily similar to his own. Adult children who gradually reduce contact, grandchildren who stop calling, family gatherings that happen without them. The pattern is always the same. The elderly person becomes redefined as a burden rather than a family member, their needs and limitations seen as obstacles rather than natural parts of aging that families should accommodate with love and patience. The more Bill reads, the angrier he becomes. Not just at Susan and Mark, but at a culture that treats elderly people as disposable once they're no longer economically productive or physically convenient. He thinks about his own parents who lived with him and Eleanor for their final years, who were included in every family decision and celebration until the day they died. When did families stop taking care of their elders and start warehousing them instead? 10 days after Susan's devastating announcement, Bill receives a call that changes everything. Emma, his 16-year-old granddaughter, is crying so hard he can barely understand her words. "Grandpa, can you come pick me up? I'm at the mall and Mom and Dad, they said some terrible things and I can't. I don't want to go home right now." Bill doesn't hesitate. Despite his still healing knee, he drives across town to find Emma sitting on a bench outside the mall's food court, her face streaked with tears and her usual confident demeanor shattered. "What happened, sweetheart?" Bill asks, settling beside her on the bench. Emma wipes her nose with a tissue and looks at her grandfather with eyes that seem much older than 16. "I found out about the Europe trip, about how they decided not to invite you." Bill's heart sinks. "Emma, that's between your parents and me. You don't need to worry about, no, Grandpa, you don't understand. Emma interrupts. I confronted them about it. I asked why you weren't coming. And Mom said things that I can't unhear. Emma takes a shaky breath before continuing. She said that old people just slow everyone down, that you'd complain about everything and ruin the vacation for the rest of us. She said that dragging grandparents on family trips is something poor families do because they can't afford separate vacations, and we're not poor anymore. The words hit Bill like a physical assault. Poor families drag grandparents along, but successful families leave them behind. His daughter has reduced his lifetime of love and sacrifice to a marker of low social status. And then, Emma continues, her voice growing stronger with anger, Dad said that Europe would be wasted on you because old people can't appreciate culture the way young people can. He said you'd just want to sit in the hotel room and watch American TV. Bill feels something fundamental shift inside him. It's one thing for Susan and Mark to exclude him from their plans, but it's another thing entirely for them to poison his grandchildren's minds with such casual cruelty toward elderly people in general, and him specifically. What did you say to them? Bill asks. I told them they were being horrible and that I didn't want to go to Europe if it meant leaving you behind. And you know what Mom said? Bill waits, though he dreads the answer. She said that if I was too immature to understand family priorities, maybe I shouldn't go either. She said that choosing a grandfather over a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity showed poor judgment, and that she was disappointed in me. Emma starts crying again, and Bill pulls her into a hug, feeling his own anger crystallize into something cold and purposeful. Susan has crossed a line by using emotional manipulation to force her daughter to choose between her grandfather and her family's approval. Emma, what would you say if I told you that you don't have to choose between your grandfather and your family vacation? What do you mean? Bill pulls out his phone and shows Emma a website he's been studying for the past week. Educational tours for seniors and their families. They organize trips specifically designed for multi-generational groups, cultural experiences, historical sites, comfortable accommodations, and activities that everyone can enjoy together. Emma stares at the screen, her tears stopping as she reads about trips to Italy, France, Greece, and England, specifically designed to bridge generational gaps and create positive experiences for families that include elderly members. Grandpa, this looks amazing. But how? Emma, your parents have made it clear that they don't want me to be part of their family vacation, but they never said you and Jason couldn't be part of mine. The idea takes shape as Bill speaks, crystallizing from weeks of hurt and research into a concrete plan. What if I organized my own trip to Europe? A grandfather-grandchildren adventure with itineraries designed specifically for seniors and young people to experience together. Would you and Jason be interested in that? Emma's face lights up for the first time since Bill found her at the mall. Are you serious? You would take Jason and me to Europe without Mom and Dad? I'm completely serious. I've been looking at my finances, and I have more than enough money for the three of us to have an incredible 2-week European adventure. Real cultural experiences, not just tourist traps. Art museums, historical sites, cooking classes, walking tours designed for mixed-age groups. But Mom and Dad would never allow it. Bill's smile is gentle but determined. Emma, you're 16 years old. You're old enough to decide whether you want to spend your summer vacation being lectured about why your grandfather is a burden, or actually having adventures with him. And Jason is mature enough to make his own choice too. What about school? The trip I'm looking at is educational travel. Many schools give credit for properly documented cultural experiences. We'd be learning history, art, and languages while making memories that will last a lifetime. Emma hugs her grandfather tightly. I love you, Grandpa, and I think Mom and Dad are being terrible to you. They're not terrible people, sweetheart. They're just people who have forgotten that families are supposed to take care of each other, not discard each other when inconvenient. That evening, Bill calls Jason directly, something he's never done without going through Susan or Mark first. His 12-year-old grandson listens carefully as Bill explains the situation and extends the invitation for a grandfather-grandson European adventure. So Mom and Dad don't want you to come with us because they think you're too old? Jason asks, his voice indignant. That's their decision, Jason. But I'm offering you a different choice. You can go with your parents and experience Europe their way, or you can come with Emma and me and experience it our way. What's the difference? Bill pulls out the research he's compiled over the past week. Your parents' trip focuses on trendy restaurants, nightlife, and activities designed for adults. My trip focuses on history, culture, hands-on learning experiences, and adventures designed for multiple generations to enjoy together. He describes the itinerary he's been planning. Cooking classes in Tuscany where 3 generations can learn together, historical walking tours designed to engage both seniors and children, art workshops in Paris where age doesn't matter, and accommodations in family-friendly hotels that cater to multi-generational travel. And you'd really take us without Mom and Dad? Jason, I've been your grandfather for 12 years. I've attended every school play, every baseball game, every birthday party. I've helped you with homework, taught you to fish, and listened to your dreams about becoming a marine biologist. If your parents think I'm too old to share new experiences with you, maybe it's time for us to prove them wrong. Jason is quiet for a long moment. Grandpa, would we still love Mom and Dad if we went with you instead? The question breaks Bill's heart and fills him with pride simultaneously. At 12, his grandson is wise enough to understand that this decision isn't about choosing sides in some family war, but about choosing between 2 different approaches to family relationships. Of course we'd still love them, Jason. Love isn't something you turn on and off based on disagreements. But sometimes we have to show the people we love that their behavior is hurting us. And the only way to do that is by making choices that demonstrate our values. What values? That families should include everyone, not exclude people because they're inconvenient. That grandparents and grandchildren have important relationships that don't depend on parents' approval. That age is something to respect and learn from, not something to hide or be ashamed of. The next morning, Bill's phone rings at 7 a.m. Susan's voice is sharp with anger and panic. Dad, what did you say to my children? Emma came home last night talking about some ridiculous European trip with you, and now Jason is refusing to pack for our vacation. I offered them an alternative to being taught that their grandfather is a burden. Bill replies calmly, You had no right to involve the children in our adult disagreement. Susan, you involved the children the moment you decided to teach them that elderly family members should be excluded from family activities. I'm simply offering them a different lesson. This is emotional manipulation, Dad. You're putting my children in an impossible position. Bill considers pointing out the irony of this accusation coming from someone who gave her daughter an ultimatum about choosing between her grandfather and her family's approval, but he decides against it. Susan is clearly operating from a place of panic rather than rational thought. The children are free to make their own choice, Bill says instead. They can go to Europe with parents who consider their grandfather too burdensome to include, or they can go with a grandfather who considers them worth traveling the world to spend time with. Dad, you're being unreasonable. We never said you were burdensome. Susan, you told me that my limitations were complicating the family's vacation experience. You said that older people have different needs that restrict younger people's activities. You told me that the fate of old people is to stay home watching TV. Those are your words, not mine. There's a long pause. I may have expressed myself poorly, but you expressed yourself perfectly clearly. And now your children have heard your true feelings about elderly people. Are you surprised that they're reconsidering whether they want to adopt those attitudes? This is insane, Dad. You can't just take my children to Europe without my permission. Actually, I can. Emma is 16 and capable of making her own travel decisions with appropriate adult supervision. Jason is old enough to participate in educational travel programs. Both children have passports from previous family trips. And I'm their grandfather, not some stranger trying to kidnap them. Bill can hear Mark's voice in the background, though he can't make out the words. Susan covers the phone for a moment, then returns with her voice more controlled but no less angry. Dad, we need to meet and discuss this rationally. This situation is getting out of hand. I agree completely. Why don't you and Mark come over this afternoon? Bring the children so they can participate in the discussion about their summer plans. This is not a decision for children to make. Susan, everything about this situation started with decisions about children. Your decision to teach them that their grandfather is someone to be avoided rather than included. If you want to change the outcome, you need to change the lesson you're teaching. That afternoon, the entire family gathers in Bill's living room for the most difficult conversation of their lives. Emma and Jason sit on either side of their grandfather, while Susan and Mark occupy the sofa with the stiff formality of people attending a business negotiation rather than a family meeting. Let's be clear about what's happening here. Mark begins, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Bill, you're using our children as weapons in some kind of revenge scheme because we hurt your feelings about the vacation. Bill looks at his son-in-law with steady eyes. Mark, I'm offering my grandchildren an opportunity to learn about the world with someone who loves them unconditionally and wants to share new experiences with them. If you consider that a weapon, perhaps you should examine why you feel threatened by your children spending time with their grandfather. We're not threatened, Susan snaps. We're concerned about your motivations and your ability to properly supervise two children in a foreign country. My motivations are to spend meaningful time with my grandchildren while I'm still healthy enough to travel. As for supervision, I successfully raised you, Susan, and I've been traveling internationally for decades. I'm not sure why you think I've suddenly become incompetent. Emma speaks up for the first time. Mom, why are you so angry about Grandpa wanting to take us on a trip? You were planning to leave him home alone anyway. Susan's composure cracks. Emma, this isn't about what Grandpa wants. This is about family unity and respect for parental authority. What about respect for Grandpa? Jason asks. Why is it okay for you to exclude him, but it's not okay for him to include us? Mark leans forward, his tone becoming more aggressive. Because we're your parents, Jason. We make the decisions about what's best for you, not your grandfather. Even when those decisions hurt people we love, Emma challenges. Bill watches his grandchildren defend principles of inclusion and respect against their parents' arguments about authority and control, and he realizes that Susan and Mark have already lost this battle. Not because Bill is manipulating the children, but because the children are old enough to recognize the difference between right and wrong. Let me propose a solution, Bill says quietly. You take your European vacation as planned. Emma and Jason come with me on my educational travel program. Everyone gets what they want. Absolutely not, Susan says immediately. I'm not letting you take my children to Europe as some kind of consolation prize for not being included in our vacation. Then include me in your vacation, Bill replies simply. The silence that follows is deafening. Susan and Mark exchange glances, and Bill can see them realizing that they've been backed into a corner of their own making. They can't include him without admitting that their original exclusion was wrong, but they can't prevent him from taking the children without appearing petty and controlling. Dad, Susan says finally, this isn't about you. This is about us wanting to have a certain kind of vacation experience. What kind of experience, Mom? Emma asks. The kind where we pretend Grandpa doesn't exist? That's not fair, Emma. Isn't it? Jason joins his sister's challenge. You told us that Grandpa would slow us down and complain about everything. You said old people can't appreciate culture. You said dragging grandparents on trips is what poor people do. How is Emma being unfair? Mark's face reddens. Jason, you don't understand the complexity of adult relationships. I understand that you're being mean to Grandpa for no good reason. Jason replies with the devastating honesty that only children can deliver. Bill realizes that this conversation has moved beyond the specific issue of vacation plans into a larger confrontation about family values and the treatment of elderly members. His grandchildren are forcing their parents to confront the ugliness of their attitudes toward aging and their willingness to discard family members who become inconvenient. Susan, Mark, Bill says gently, your children are asking you to explain why it's acceptable to exclude people we love based on age and perceived limitations. What would you like to tell them? We're not excluding you based on age, Susan protests weakly. Then why are you excluding me? Another long silence. Finally, Mark attempts an answer. Bill, we want to experience Europe as a nuclear family unit, just the four of us, without the complications that come with multi-generational travel. What complications? Emma presses. Mark stumbles over his words. Well, different interests, different energy levels, different needs. But Grandpa has the same interest we do, Jason points out. He loves history and art and trying new foods. And he has more energy than Dad does when we go hiking. Bill watches Susan's face as she realizes that her children are systematically dismantling every justification she and Mark have offered for excluding him. Worse, They're doing it not out of loyalty to their grandfather, but out of a genuine inability to understand why anyone would treat elderly family members so cruelly. "This conversation is over," Susan announces, standing abruptly. "Emma, Jason, we're going home. Dad will discuss this later when everyone has had time to calm down." "No," Emma says firmly, remaining seated beside her grandfather. "I'm not going home until you explain why you think it's okay to hurt Grandpa's feelings, just because you don't want to be inconvenienced by his age. Emma Thompson, you will not speak to me that way." "How should I speak to you, Mom? Should I pretend that what you're doing is okay? Should I act like it's normal to abandon family members when they get older?" Bill realizes that the situation has reached a breaking point. Susan and Mark are facing a choice between admitting they were wrong or escalating their authority as parents to override their children's moral objections. "Let me make this simple for everyone," Bill says, standing slowly and walking to his desk. He pulls out a folder of documents he's prepared over the past week. "I've booked 3 spots on a 2-week educational tour of Italy and France, departing the same day as your family vacation. Emma and Jason are welcome to join me if they choose to do so." He hands the brochure to Emma, who shares it with Jason. Their faces light up as they read about art workshops in Florence, cooking classes in Tuscany, historical tours of Paris, and cultural experiences designed specifically for multi-generational groups. "This looks incredible, Grandpa," Emma breathes. "Look, Jason, we could learn to make real Italian pasta and visit the places where famous artists lived. And there's a marine biology workshop in the French coastal region," Jason adds excitedly, reading over his sister's shoulder. "We could study Mediterranean sea life and learn about ocean conservation." Susan snatches the brochure from Emma's hands, scanning it with growing alarm. The educational tour Bill has selected is clearly more comprehensive and culturally enriching than the standard tourist package she and Mark have booked. Worse, it's specifically designed to create meaningful experiences between grandparents and grandchildren, highlighting exactly the kind of relationship she's been trying to diminish. "This is expensive, Dad," Susan says, though her voice lacks conviction. "You can't afford to spend this kind of money on a vacation." "Actually, I can," Bill replies calmly. "I've been saving for years, and I've decided this is exactly what I want to spend my money on. Creating memories with my grandchildren while I'm still able to travel." Mark examines the brochure more carefully, his expression growing troubled as he realizes the implications. "Bill, this tour costs more than our entire family vacation. Where are you getting this kind of money?" Bill sits back down in his recliner, his expression thoughtful. "I've been meeting with my financial advisor about restructuring my estate planning. It turns out that when you no longer need to leave money to family members who consider you a burden, you have a lot more freedom to spend it on people who actually want to spend time with you." The words hit Susan like a physical blow. "Dad, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that I've been reevaluating my priorities, Susan. For years I've been careful with my money because I wanted to leave you and the children a substantial inheritance. But if my presence in your lives is unwelcome, perhaps my money should go to causes that actually value what I have to offer." Bill pulls out another document from his folder, a letter from a charitable foundation thanking him for his initial inquiry about a substantial donation. "I've been researching charities that support elderly people who have been abandoned by their families," he continues. "It's a surprisingly common problem, and there are organizations doing wonderful work to provide companionship and activities for seniors whose children find them too inconvenient to include in family life." Susan's face goes pale as she realizes the full implications of her father's words. Not only is he planning to take her children on an elaborate European vacation, but he's also threatening to redirect his inheritance away from his own family. "Dad, you can't be serious about this," she says desperately. "I'm completely serious, Susan. Emma and Jason have shown me what it feels like to be valued and included. If their parents prefer to exclude me, then perhaps I should focus my time and resources on people who appreciate what I have to offer." The confrontation that follows is unlike anything the Thompson family has ever experienced. Emma and Jason stand firmly beside their grandfather, defending his right to be included in family activities and challenging their parents' treatment of him. Susan and Mark find themselves forced to justify their exclusion of Bill, and their arguments sound increasingly hollow and selfish when examined by their own children. The turning point comes when Emma delivers an ultimatum that no one sees coming. Mom, Dad, if you can't find room in your lives for Grandpa, then maybe Jason and I need to reconsider whether we want to be part of a family that abandons people when they become inconvenient. The threat of losing their children forces Susan and Mark to confront the ugliness of their own attitudes. They realize that their treatment of Bill hasn't just hurt him. It's also taught their children that elderly family members are disposable, a lesson that will inevitably come back to haunt them as they age. What follows is a painful but necessary reckoning. Susan breaks down and admits that her fear of her own aging has caused her to see her father as a preview of her own future irrelevance. Mark acknowledges that his impatience with Bill's needs reflects his own discomfort with the responsibilities that come with having elderly family members. The European vacation becomes a turning point for the entire family. Bill, Emma, and Jason have their grandfather-grandchildren adventure. But halfway through the trip, Susan and Mark join them. The remainder of the vacation becomes an exercise in multi-generational travel, with each family member contributing their unique strengths to create experiences that none of them could have had alone. Bill's knowledge of history and culture enriches every museum visit and walking tour. Emma's energy and curiosity open doors to experiences that Bill might have missed. Jason's scientific interests lead them to discoveries about marine biology and environmental conservation that fascinate all three generations. Even Susan and Mark find that including Bill in their activities enhances rather than limits their enjoyment. The photographs from that trip tell the story of a family learning to function as a true multi-generational unit. There are pictures of Bill teaching Emma to paint in a Tuscan art studio, of Jason and his grandfather studying tide pools along the French coast, of Susan and her father sharing a quiet moment on a park bench in Paris, while Mark and the children explore a nearby market. But the most important photograph is taken on their last night in Europe. The entire family gathered around a table at a small restaurant in Rome, 4 generations sharing stories, laughter, and the kind of easy companionship that comes from mutual respect and genuine affection. When they return home, the dynamics of the Thompson family have been permanently altered. Susan and Mark have learned that including elderly family members doesn't limit their experiences, it enriches them. Emma and Jason have discovered that their grandfather is not a burden to be managed, but a treasure to be cherished. And Bill has found his way back to the center of a family that now understands his true value. The story doesn't end with that European vacation, however. It continues through Emma's high school graduation, where Bill sits in the front row alongside her parents. It continues through Jason's science fair victories, where his grandfather's encouragement and wisdom play a crucial role in his success. It continues through Susan's eventual divorce from Mark, when Bill becomes her primary source of emotional support and practical guidance. Most importantly, it continues through Emma's wedding 5 years later, where Bill walks her down the aisle alongside her mother, symbolizing the healing that has taken place in their family. In her wedding vows, Emma promises to create a family that values all generations, a commitment that she and her new husband fulfill when they have children of their own. The final scene of this story takes place 7 years after that original confrontation in Bill's living room. Bill Thompson, now 79 years old, sits in that same chair, but the room has been transformed. The walls are covered with photographs from family vacations in Italy, France, Greece, and Ireland. All trips planned around the principle that multiple generations can enhance each other's experiences. On this particular evening, Bill is surrounded by his great-grandchildren, Emma's 2 young children who call him Great-Grandpa Bill, and beg him to tell stories about the old days. Susan sits nearby, no longer the impatient woman who once declared that old people should stay home watching TV, but a grandmother who has learned to treasure the wisdom and experience that come with age. "Tell us about the time you and Grandma Emma went to Italy," 4-year-old Lucy demands, climbing onto Bill's lap. "Well, Piccola," Bill begins, using the Italian endearment he learned during their first European adventure. It all started when some people thought that grandpas were too old to have adventures. As Bill tells his story, his voice strong despite his 79 years, the camera pulls back to show the living room filled with multiple generations of the Thompson family. There are teenagers helping elderly relatives with technology, middle-aged adults seeking advice from their parents, and young children absorbing wisdom from their grandparents and great-grandparents. This is the true ending of the story, not with an old man sitting alone watching television while his family lives without him. but with an elderly patriarch surrounded by multiple generations who have learned that families are strongest when they include everyone regardless of age or limitation. The fate of old people is not to be discarded when they become inconvenient. The fate of old people who refuse to accept marginalization is to create families that understand the difference between love that includes and love that excludes, between convenience and true caring, between tolerance and genuine respect. As the evening winds down and the various family members prepare to leave, Emma gives her grandfather a long hug. "Thank you, Grandpa," she whispers, "for teaching us that fighting for your place in the family was really fighting for all of us." Bill looks around the room one last time, at the photographs documenting years of inclusive family adventures, at the multiple generations who have learned to value each other's contributions, at the legacy of love that he and Eleanor always hoped to leave behind. "The fate of old people," he says quietly to Emma, "is whatever they're strong enough to create. And sometimes when families forget that, it takes a stubborn grandfather to remind them what love really means." Outside, snow begins to fall on the quiet streets of Cedar Falls, covering the familiar neighborhood with a blanket of white that makes everything look new again. Inside, an elderly man who refused to disappear sits surrounded by a family that has learned the most important lesson of all, that true wealth is measured not in convenience, but in connection across all generations. The story that began with cruel words about old people staying home watching TV ends with an old man who proved that the fate of elderly people is not abandonment, but the continued capacity to love, to teach, and to remain essential members of families that understand what really matters. This is how the story ends, not with surrender to society's expectations about aging, but with victory over the forces that would marginalize and discard the elderly. Because sometimes the most important battles are fought not with weapons but with love, persistence, and the unshakable belief that every person deserves to be valued for who they are, not dismissed for what they can no longer do. The fate of old people is to remain vital, engaged, and beloved members of families that recognize the treasure hidden in every generation. And sometimes it takes a crisis to remind everyone what they stand to lose when they choose convenience over connection, exclusion over inclusion, and tolerance over true love. The end.